to episode 6 of Women in Finance. It's been a very interesting journey, at least over the past few weeks. We've had some phenomenal guests come onto the show to share their story and their journey of how they got into the finance industry. Today, I have a special guest. Her name is Santhuri Thaver. She is the head of credit at Ashburton Investments. A little bit about her: she's had over 13 years of experience in debt financing, largely spent within the corporate and investment banking divisions for a number of the big four South African financial institutions. She also has extensive corporate and project finance experience across local, regional, and international markets. Santhuri, thank you so much for wanting to tell your story.
Thank you, Nastasia, and it's good to see you again.
So, you've had a very interesting background. I was reading your bio, and I'm curious to know, how did you come this way with the road traveled to finance? Was it always something you wanted to do as a kid?
Interesting question. So I actually completed my high schooling at a convent, and I must say, personally for me, going to an all-girls school, it did facilitate my confidence in my abilities and not being apprehensive in voicing my opinion. When I was in grade 11, we did this career suitability test, and the two options that came up was chartered accountant or doctor. And when making the decision, I wanted an educational base that really wouldn't limit me, whether I wanted to be, a CFO or an investment banker or a portfolio manager. And at the time, merchant banking, a very sexy term, was flashing in my head. And my brother at the time, he was already a qualified CA, and he had moved into development finance. So I kind of, experienced this journey through him, and I thus knew some of what the path entailed. I also wasn't too fond of cadavers, so that wiped out the alternative of being a doctor. But then following university, I completed my articles at a Big Four. I went straight into banking, and then developed an affinity for credit. And through roles at various organizations, it eventually led to my current role, heading up the credit function at Ashburton, which I'm very much enjoying.
That's so awesome. So, when you were younger, were you good at numbers? Because the reason I didn't go the CA route or study anything accounting related was because I had a love-hate relationship with accounting. We got along on good days, and on other days it was just a nightmare. So what were you like in high school and varsity? Were you a straight A student, diligent?
So I would say yes, definitely in school. I enjoyed accounting. I had an affinity for numbers. I also enjoyed chemistry very much. But in varsity, I would say I had a very balanced life. So I wasn't that straight A student. I passed the degree within the timeline, but I also enjoyed the varsity life, which I think is always good to have that balance.
The one thing I noticed about your bio as well is that you're a CFA charter holder. And I think in the past episodes, you're probably the second guest who also has a CFA. I'm going to take you back here. In preparation for it, how hard or easy was it to get through the different levels? Because I can imagine they're a little bit intense.
Yeah. So for level 1 and level 2, I kind of I didn't actually put in much effort. I literally, kind of started prepping a few weeks before, and I relied a lot on my, chartered accountant's financial background. And I was fortunate, and I cleared those levels. I took the same approach for level 3, which was a massive mistake. So I didn't make level 3 on my first attempt. So I regrouped, and I wrote it again, prepped much more. And then cleared it. And then on my second attempt, I then cleared level 3. So I think it's important that you balance being prepped with your inherent natural abilities.
Right. If someone had to ask you, like, if somebody young watching this interview, what does the head of credit actually do? So if you had to give us a typical day, what does that entail?
A typical day is never planned. You might get up in the morning and say, "Oh, this is what I need to get done today." And then it's the complete opposite. But I think from a high level point of view, I think what my focus is really, to create value for my clients. I represent pension fund money, retirement industry money, and that's, really important because it's people's lives and people's savings, and the quality of their lives as they retire. So, that's kind of the overarching principle and what's really important. But you get thrown anything and everything during the day, and you've got to be very flexible and very adaptable, throughout the day.
Yeah. What would you say were some of the challenges you encountered over the years, especially when you look back at how far you've come?
So the financial sector has been and remains male dominated, and being a female and also being a female of color, it's a double whammy. So with the result that you always have to go the extra mile to prove your capabilities, your seat at the table, to substantiate your opinion versus your male counterpart, and that's the reality of the situation. So for me, that's the biggest challenge. However, I would be doing a disservice to all the women and the men who fought to get females to where we are today, and the opportunities that we do have as a result, if I just gave up. So I decided, to develop a thick skin, to work harder, compared to my male counterparts, to make myself more visible, so that I could get a seat at that table and further empower women rising up in the sector.
Did you have any mentors along the way, or somebody who you could, call and ask for advice, who would guide you, etc.?
Yeah. So I do. I mean, my brother is one of my mentors. There's a huge age gap between us. We have a 12-year age difference. But he's definitely someone that's, very level-headed, and kind of, assists me in seeing this is the pros, this is the cons. Have you thought about this? So I would say he's one of my mentors. And, internally, I've also had, in various roles in organizations, supportive line managers, and sponsors, advocates. I think, when people, notice you, you sometimes develop a relationship with a sponsor. And I think there's that big difference between a mentor is someone that talks to you, and a sponsor is someone that advocates about you to somebody else. And that's important. I think, being able to couple your abilities, your capabilities, with mentorship and sponsorship as it works for you in your career.
Last week's guest said to me that she'd found that when she got into her place of work, she realized quite quickly that she was the only female in the room sitting around a table. And sometimes it was a little bit daunting to raise her voice or to share an opinion, but she had no choice because they needed answers from her. For you, how have you, navigated that? Raising your voice and saying, this is my opinion or this is what the facts say. Are you getting better at that? Do you find that you're not as nervous anymore? Were you nervous at all?
So for me, that was never a challenge. I've always been that person that would raise my hand up or say, I disagree with this point, or this is my opinion. And I think especially in asset management, that's very valuable. You need to have, an opinion, and sometimes you are contrarian. So that hasn't been a challenge for me. But what I do think is important is, around the table where you see another female sort of, struggling to voice their opinion, is that you step in and you empower them. You sort of reach out and say, what do you think? What are your views? To give them a platform and make it more conducive, for them to share their views. But I can sympathize with how she felt.
If you had to take a bird's eye view of the industry and the space you're familiar with, do you find that it's changed since you started, i.e. we're seeing a lot more women come into the space, we're seeing that we're having a lot more louder conversations around gender diversity, closing the income gap? Is it getting easier now, or do you think it's more or less the same?
So I think there's definitely been improvement in terms of diversity. I think if I just look at some of the high-ranking roles, First Rand COO, Mary Vilakazi, Emery Brown, newly appointed RMB CEO, Raisibi Marathi, Vodacom CFO. I could go on, and it's extremely encouraging for us as women, to see this. I think what's also important is, they need to be focused on inclusion. So yes, we're seeing improved diversity from a gender perspective, but we also need to look at that second part of that well-known diversity and inclusion grouping, so that women are empowered at all levels to deliver on their roles. But there's definitely more light being shed, and there's more movement in this space.
So I've had to learn the lesson. I've been doing this sort of broadcasting for like 13 years. And the one thing I had to learn is that I needed to be a little bit more clear about my career expectations, what I want to achieve. And sometimes that conversation can be missed between yourself and your line manager, or just even your general, co-workers. How have you managed to be clear about your career expectations over the years, and saying, I want to put my hand up for this, or I think this is what I want to be doing? How did you, find your way around that?
Yeah. So my approach has been to set goals and aspirations for myself in terms of my career, but coupled with this, to be fully aware and comfortable in my abilities, so that I can place myself in a position that I choose that best meets, my goals, my aspirations, those of my organization, my stakeholders, and that is fulfilling to me. So in essence, I've navigated in the sense that I would, focus on areas where I can choose my path versus someone choosing it for me, and as cheesy as it may sound, being the master of your own career destiny.
That's so interesting. We were talking about mentorship and sponsorship a little bit ago. And how do we get into that conversation where we really empower young women? Over the past few episodes, the guests have shared some really interesting things that their organizations are doing, and in fact, what they're also doing personally. Where do you think we need to start if there is an organization, or maybe even an HR person who's watching this interview thinking, how do I go back to the drawing board and change the way we do things within our organization?
Yeah. So it's a topic I think about it a lot, but maybe if I could summarize my response, is that we need to encourage fellow female colleagues to reach their potential and strive for success. And when they do so, it's up to continue to encourage them, to provide opportunities and support them in their journey. So, as I mentioned, it can take the form of mentorship or sponsorship, of up and coming women, so we can create a more conducive environment for inclusion of women in the workplace. So what I think is important is, from that broad response that I've given you, is kind of looking at, your place in the organization, and how, your role will be able to empower females in the workplace. And I'm not only speaking to the females, I'm also speaking to my male counterparts as well.
I find that, it's so interesting because, I come from a financial journalism perspective, so I don't necessarily have the full insight in terms of what happens on the corporate side. However, what I have noticed is that when you have a lot more financial journalists who are female, something happens in the air where it sort of changes the perception of what finance is all about. Because I think over the years, it's been created to be very daunting, very, as you said, male dominated, and it almost leaves a certain portion of society out of the conversation when it comes to money or the economy. From your perspective, how do you feel about having more women come onto the platform, or even come on to any platform that is, to change the perception of finance? Do you think that helps when we have a lot more women being pushed forward?
Yeah, I think it definitely does. Not only, I mean, a platform such as this, other women sort of tune in and they relate, and, they can sort of understand, like, I've been through that, or, that's a good suggestion, or maybe I can approach my problem in that way. And I think, increasing the presence of females, it improves diversity, inclusivity, what we're trying to achieve. It brings us fresh perspective. And it creates more opportunities for females currently within the sector, as well as highlights, the sector for new entrants, because, maybe as you said, someone from the outside might say, oh, it's so daunting and it's so challenging for a female, let me just pick another sector. So this is what we're trying to sort of work against. And I think, a key point is that this is never to the detriment of our male colleagues. It's to encourage equitable treatment of all.
Yeah. It's so interesting because it's like a nice segue into my next question, because we've seen, as the conversations around gender equality sort of get louder, we've seen the movement to increase that from a corporate sector perspective, national government institutions, the measures that we should be thinking about, whether it's from a policy perspective or even just within our organizations. What do you think can be implemented in the near future to help bridge that gap? I mean, mentorship is the one thing we spoke about. And I'm wondering, I don't know, maybe skills development, trying to encourage our women to, do something else that's different, push them gently, but push them to reach the best level they can get to.
Yeah, I think, those are definitely important in terms of, training programs, support, etc. But I think for me, what's really, really important is we've seen numerous reports about the gender pay gap. And for me, the top thing is equal work, equal pay, full stop. I think that's extremely important. We want to see everything else. We want to see the diversity. We want to see the inclusion. But females also need to be compensated accordingly.
Do you remember when you had to ask for a raise? Does that memory come back? And what was that like, that conversation? Were you nervous? Did you get the raise now that we're talking about gender pay gap?
Yeah, so I think, early on in my career, that was when I was more apprehensive, when I was like, I wouldn't just sort of go into the room and tell the boss, listen, I'm underpaid and you need to go and relook at my salary. Generally females kind of feel like, no, I can't ask that question, or I can't say this amount is too little. Let me take this opportunity that has come my way. Yeah. And actually I've changed, recently, as I've, progressed through roles. There was actually, one point where I was offered a role and I said, no, this salary is not suitable, because I know what I'm capable of. I know what I bring to the table, and I know what this role entails. And this is my amount. And I did get it. So I would say, you don't be afraid to approach that. There's certain situations, that are dynamic, and sometimes you may need a job and you can't be in that position. But I think when you can be in that position, try and advocate for yourself. You first and foremost are your best cheerleader. So.
I think in the beginning of the interview, when you were giving us some perspective in terms of what the head of credit does, it gave me the impression that there's so many people who sort of trust you, the stakeholders that you spoke about. Do you ever get worried about getting a call wrong or being wrong on a particular view? And are you okay with sometimes being wrong, I guess, as long as you know why you're wrong and you're willing to fix it? Because I think sometimes, our jobs have so many different responsibilities that you can be so afraid of failure or so afraid of making the wrong decision, especially when it impacts so many people.
Yeah. And I think particularly if it's, if it's financial related, and has financial consequences. So yes, I do worry about it. And sometimes it keeps me up at night. But I always try to, make the most informed decisions. I think, we don't have crystal balls, and sometimes it's likely that you might make the wrong call. But I think it's important to recognize when you've made the wrong call, to highlight it, to bring it to the attention of the relevant parties, to mitigate it, as quickly as possible, and then to learn from it going forward. Because we are humans, we're not perfect, as much as we like to be perfect. But, never to kind of just kind of fall down and say, I give up now. I'm never going to be the best portfolio manager. But just to pick yourself up and continue from there.
It's so nice that you said that, we are human, which is so important, because last week's guest is an economist. And I asked her, in a world, it's 2022, there have been so many things that have happened globally, from geopolitical perspectives and, market volatility. And I asked her what kept her up at night, like what worries her about the world today. And she mentioned, obviously, there are a lot more shocks, a lot more global shocks that she has experienced in her more than 20 years of, being an economist. So from your perspective, what worries you given the state of the world we're in? And on the other side, what excites you given where we are as a society, as human beings?
Yeah, I think in terms of a broader question, and I won't only relate it to, finance and credit, what keeps me up at night is just, the social inequality in our country. And, for me, it's, trying to do the most to slowly bridge that gap and for people to get access, to healthcare and to basic infrastructure services and increase employment. So we improve the quality of lives of South Africans. And in the contra, what excites me is that, we live in this beautiful country with amazing potential. And I think, the spirit of South Africans is never lost. We have load shedding and we go through so much, but we're very resilient people. So that does excite me.
I'm going to throw you in the deep end with this one. When you talk about living in South Africa, over the years, have you ever thought about immigrating? Do you have friends who have, pursued opportunities in other countries?
Yeah. So I myself did for a very brief time during COVID, and then I returned back to South Africa. I think it's a very unique decision, and there's some people that go because they just are like, I don't see a future for SA and this is my reason for leaving. And there's some people that go because they just want to explore a different country. I think you just need to be clear about what are your reasons for leaving. Because they say, wherever you are, there you are. So, you can change the scenery, but you need to be comfortable with yourself and your life and, sort of where you are in that space. So doesn't necessarily mean moving to Canada or the USA is going to improve your life like this overnight. So I think that's very important. Just be clear about the reasons as to why you want to immigrate. What are the pros? What are the cons? Should be up to you and your decision.
Given everything you know and have learned along the ways, if you had to advise your younger self, what would you say to her?
Sure. So I think when your younger self, you have this career and life path mapped out, but life never goes according to plan. And you don't know where, certain roads would lead you. My advice is always to be adaptable, to be flexible, to move with the changes, deal with challenges head on. Otherwise, you are going to frustrate yourself. You are going to create unhappiness. But if you have this attitude to life, this adaptable, flexible attitude, it will lead you to a place where you didn't expect to be, but maybe a place where your talents can be best applied.
Before I let you go, this younger self that we're talking to, how old is she?
Oh, this younger self is probably 16.
Oh, that's very interesting. Santhuri, thank you so much for making time to chat to me and also sharing your story. I mean, that's really remarkable. And the one thing that I love about our conversation is that, you know, apart from the fact that you and I also interact from a professional point of view, talking about some of the themes that relate to your role, it also gives the audience a chance to get to know you better, which is something that I always think is very important for many of the guests that I encounter in my sort of broadcasting daily routine.
Thank you, Nastasia, and thank you so much for the opportunity and having me on.
That was Santhuri Thaver, who's the head of credit at Ashburton Investments. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you, so stay tuned for that.